November 13, 2022, King Road, Moscow, Idaho. A house that was supposed to be a refuge for 6 students turned into a horrific place that shook America. 4 students' lives were lost, leaving a dark mystery and deep sorrow for all. They were Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They were murdered between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. What really happened that night? Who had the heart to kill 4 hopeful young people? Let's explore the dark story that shook Moscow, Idaho. The murder of 4 University of Idaho students. The night before the tragedy, the last traces of the victims. Moscow, Idaho, a normally quiet small town where major crimes are rare. November 12, 2022, there was something different in the air. No one realized that this would be the last night for 4 University of Idaho students. Madison Mogen, 21, from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, is a senior at the university, majoring in marketing.
So just smart and funny and beautiful. She was just nice to everybody.
Kaylee Gonsalves, 21, of Rathdrum, Idaho, is also a senior, majoring in general studies.
Everything. They came here together. They eventually get into the same apartment together. And in the end, they died together.
Zana Kernodle, 20, of Post Falls, Idaho, is majoring in marketing and is a member of Pi Beta Phi sorority.
Zana, you will not be forgotten. You have impacted so many lives and have given people so much love. I hope I can make you proud and try to leave an impact on this world and on people like you did.
Ethan Chapin, a 20-year-old freshman from Mount Vernon, Washington, is a member of Sigma Chi. He is majoring in recreation, sports, and tourism management.
We are eternally grateful that we spent so much time with him, because time is precious and it's something you can't get back.
Ethan, who is Zana's boyfriend, horsing Kaylee with Maddie, beaming on her shoulder, best friend for life. Ethan with his arm around Zana's shoulder, young love in full bloom. The moment that should have been a memory of their idyllic college days will forever be a reminder of the gruesome murder that left them confined to the grave, and their 2 fellow survivors are on the edge. The photo was taken before they went about their respective activities. On Saturday morning, November 12, 2022, Kaylee and Madison were close friends. The 2 met in 6th grade and were best friends. They went to the same school, then started looking for colleges. They came to the same university, and also they ended up living in the same house. 1:32 a.m. traces at the bar and food truck. They spent the night having a good time at a local bar called the Corner Club. Surveillance cameras caught them joking around and enjoying time with friends. There were no signs that they felt threatened. However, after leaving the bar, they went to a food truck to buy some food before heading home. The camera at the food truck caught them around 1:40 a.m. 2 young girls laughing and enjoying the night, unaware that someone might be watching them. In the footage, a male figure can be seen standing near them. His face is unclear, but his gestures seem suspicious. Is this just a coincidence, or is this someone who played a role in the night's tragedy? After getting food, Kaylee and Madison booked a ride through a rideshare service and arrived at their home on King Road around 1:56 a.m. The driver who delivered them later said that the 2 girls seemed relaxed and showed no fear and that they were happy. Around the same time, couple Zana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin had just returned from a party at Ethan's sports community close to the girls' home. They entered the house around 1:45 a.m., a few minutes before Kaylee and Madison arrived. The other 2 roommates who were downstairs had gone to bed early and were not part of the night's activities. The 3-story house was quiet with activity in their respective rooms. Kaylee's cell phone showed that she had called her ex-boyfriend several times between 2:26 a.m. and 2:52 a.m. However, the calls were not answered. Meanwhile, at 4 a.m., she was still awake using a social media app on her phone. Then, at around 4 a.m., the front door of the house was allegedly opened slowly. Was this the moment when someone entered the house? On the other hand, the surveillance camera of a neighboring house captured the faint sound of screaming and banging at around 4:17 a.m. However, the sound was only heard for a few seconds before everything went silent again. The neighbors did not report hearing any suspicious screams. But strangely, Kaylee's usually barking pet dog remained silent that night. Was this a sign that the perpetrator was used to the dog's presence? Even more chilling, One of the surviving roommates saw a masked man in the house, but didn't report it to the police until the next morning. Who was that man? Why was he there? And more importantly, how did he get in without any sign of resistance from the victims? The discovery of the bodies, the horror that unfolds. That morning, November 13, 2022, Moscow, Idaho was still sleeping in peace, but in a rented house on King Road. That peace had turned into an unimaginable nightmare. 11:58 a.m., a mysterious 911 call. "There's someone unconscious," said one of the survivors of the murder, her voice sounding shaky and stuttered. However, something was off. There were no cries for help, no reports of blood, and none of the usual panic heard in murder cases. When officers arrived at the scene a few minutes later, 12:10 p.m., a horrifying sight. As officers entered, the smell of blood filled the air. Inside the rooms on the second and third floors, they found 4 lifeless bodies. Their injuries showed that this attack was quick, brutal, and deadly. In Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonkev's room, their bodies were found together on the bed. The stab wounds on their bodies suggest that the killings were carried out with incredible intensity. There were no signs of great resistance. Does this mean they were attacked while still asleep? Meanwhile, on the second floor, Zana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin suffered the same fate. However, there was something different about Zana's body. Based on the forensic report, she had a defensive wound on her arm, which suggested that she might have been the only one who managed to wake up and fight back before losing her life. They had no idea that they would find one of the most gruesome murder scenes in the history of Moscow, Idaho. "We've never seen anything like this before," said one of the police officers who first entered the house. What was even more astonishing to investigators was there was no sign of forced entry. All doors and windows were tightly closed. Does this mean the perpetrator had access to the house? Did someone open the door for him? Or was he already inside the house before the attack began? Their 2 surviving friends, who were on the first floor, were not injured at all. They also did not report hearing any sounds of fighting or any obvious signs of danger. However, one of them saw something surprising. In a statement, one of the survivors told police that, in the early hours of the morning of the incident, she opened her door 3 times after waking up at around 4 a.m. and heard Gongtao's playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, located on the 3rd floor. She also told police that she didn't see anything when she first looked out of her bedroom. Upon opening the door a second time, she heard what she believed to be crying sounds coming from Zana Kernodle's room. She said that she heard a man's voice saying, "It's okay, I'll help you." And she heard a slightly loud crying sound and opened the door for the 3rd time. When she looked out, she saw a figure dressed in black and a mask covering the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. Then she described the person as a man, about 5 feet 10 inches tall or so, who was not very muscular, but of athletic build with thick eyebrows. She did not scream. She didn't report anything. She just stood there transfixed in fear. The man walked past her. The figure walked calmly towards the back door and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The woman then returned to her room and locked the door. Why would a killer choose to walk away after committing a brutal murder and also leaving behind an eyewitness? A few days after the murder, the normally peaceful Moscow, Idaho, was now the center of national attention. Police began gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building a picture of the shadowy killer who had been in and out of the house. Loved ones of the murder victims helped the police to find information about the murders on social media. Of the many who provided information, there was one name that provided information about what happened, namely Papa Roger. One of the indications that attracted attention was that Papa Roger mentioned a knife sheath that was left at the scene before the information was made public by the authorities. In a post, the account speculated that a knife sheath may have been found inside the house, which was later proven true based on released court documents. So, who exactly is Papa Roger? Unfortunately for the killer, he left or intentionally left a trail which was a breath of fresh air for the local police. Apart from the characteristics given by the surviving witness and a glove, there was still one small clue that would pave the way to the main suspect. It was the surveillance camera footage of the house, The local police found a knife sheath in Kaylee and Madison's room. A K-bar knife sheath used to cut the ligaments of cattle or other animals. There was a man's DNA, but the police still did not have a suspect because the DNA did not match that of all the people closest to the victims, which included family, close friends, and the local community. On the other hand, not so long ago, investigators checking surveillance cameras recorded near the house showed a white sedan, later identified as a Hyundai Elantra, driving past the house 3 times in the early hours of November 13th and returning a 4th time around 4:04 a.m. The car was next seen on surveillance cameras leaving King Road, 16 minutes later at high speed. Moscow police had asked law enforcement agencies in the area to look for that type of vehicle after FBI forensic examiners determined a 2011 to 2016 Elantra was seen in video footage from the victim's neighborhood on the night of the murder. On November 29th, a police officer discovered that the 2015 Elantra was registered to Bryan Kohberger, and another officer spotted the vehicle in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Pullman, Washington, located about 10 miles from Moscow. Weeks after the brutal murder, Bryan Kohberger left Washington and traveled to Pennsylvania with his father. He was seen by a surveillance footage to give his offense information, and he was stopped 2 times during the trip. They made a 500-mile road trip. The local police had Bryan Kohberger's cell phone number from a violation. Now the police had his cell phone records, showing that he had staked out the house repeatedly before the incident. And this is where everything changed. Investigators finally found Kohberger's cell phone signal, which was suddenly turned off hours before the murder. However, when the phone came back on, the signal showed a location several miles outside of Moscow, Idaho, as if he was trying to leave the scene undetected. He thought that by turning off his cell phone, he could eliminate the trail. But it was precisely that gap that made him suspicious. On November 13th, her phone records showed that Kohberger's cell phone was again in the vicinity of the murder scene. On the morning of the murder, it left Kohberger's residence in Pullman, Washington, around 9 a.m. and headed to Moscow, Idaho. There, the phone utilized cellular resources that would provide coverage to the area of the murdered student's home. Between 9:12 a.m. and 9:21 a.m., before appearing to return to her home, was she there to confirm anything? But there was one thing the police didn't have: hard evidence linking Bryan Kohberger directly to the night of the murder. To strengthen the evidence, the police in Idaho worked with agents in Pennsylvania. On December 27, 2022, Pennsylvania agents recovered trash from the Kohberger family residence located in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. The evidence was sent to the Idaho State Laboratory for testing. On December 28, 2022, the Idaho State Laboratory reported that the DNA profile obtained from the trash and the DNA profile obtained from the knife sheath identified a non-excluded male as the biological father of the suspect profile. At least 99.9998% of the male population is estimated to be excluded from being the biological father of the suspect. The evidence includes that the victim who survived the murder was a man, about 5 feet 10 inches tall or so, who was not particularly muscular, but athletically built with thick eyebrows. There was also a knife sheath recovered by the police, a white sedan identified as a Hyundai Elantra, and DNA from the trash and knife sheath, showing the name Bryan Kohberger. And finally, on December 30th, 2022, in a Pennsylvania home, the police made their move. Idaho, Moscow police arrested Bryan Kohberger. Oh, he didn't resist. He just stood still, as if he already knew that his time had come. Bryan Kohberger grew up in the Pocono Mountains of eastern Pennsylvania, who was 28 years old at the time of the murder, holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in criminal justice from DeSales University in Center Valley of Pennsylvania. Prior to his arrest on December 30th, 2022, Bryan Kohberger was pursuing his doctorate in criminology and was a teaching assistant in the Criminal Justice Department at Washington State University. He lived in an apartment on campus, about 8 miles from the site of his brutal murder. What was Bryan Kohberger's real motive for brutally murdering 4 innocent University of Idaho students? Is he trying out a theory that he believes the murders are unknowable if he kills with passion? Now let's go back to that tense night. Back to November 13th, 2022. Back to the moments when 4 students lost their lives in a matter of minutes. 3:45 a.m. Shadows in the house. A tall man wearing a black mask enters the King Road house through the back sliding door. He was in no hurry. He knows the route of the house. He knew where the victims were. 4 a.m., the attack begins. He walked into Kaylee and Madison's room. Within seconds, the knife was drawn. There were no long screams, no great resistance, just a murderous silence. Then, she went down to the second floor. Zana was still awake. She saw something she wasn't supposed to see. She tried to resist, but it was futile. Ethan, who was in the same room, tried to get up, but the knife moved faster. And then, she was gone, through the back door, lost in the darkness of the night, leaving behind 4 lives that had been snatched in silence. The end of a mystery. Bryan Kohberger, who was charged with the murder of 4 University of Idaho students on November 13, 2022, has yet to receive a sentence. His trial is scheduled to begin in June 2025 in Boise, Idaho. If convicted, Bryan Kohberger faces the possibility of the death penalty. His lawyers have filed a motion to dismiss the application of the death penalty, citing uncertainty regarding the method of execution as inhumane. However, the judge denied the motion, stating that the death penalty remains constitutional in Idaho. This case is not just about 4 lives tragically lost. It's about someone who has studied evil so deeply that he himself became part of that darkness. Was this simply an experiment by a criminology student? Comment below